The hug in the snow asterisk. The clock in Thornwick struck 3 in the morning, while heavy snow fell across the silent town. In a tiny attic room beneath a crooked roof, a poor girl sat beside a dim candle, stitching a white dress that was never meant to be hers. Her fingers were red and cracked from cold, yet she kept sewing, because that dress was the last hope she had for a better future. She had spent 2 full days working on it, without proper rest, carefully placing every stitch with patience and quiet determination. But hope in Thornwick was fragile, and life rarely showed mercy to girls with empty pockets and soft hearts. The door suddenly burst open, and a harsh voice shattered the silence. The woman who controlled the house stepped inside with a cruel smile and took the dress from the girl's hands without hesitation. She explained that the gown had been sold to pay gambling debts, and that the girl's dreams were worth less than the gold she owed. When the girl protested weakly, the answer came as a sharp slap that echoed through the cold room. A few coins were thrown on the floor like scraps given to a beggar. The message was clear. She no longer belonged there. Within minutes, the girl found herself pushed out of the house with nothing but a thin cloak, 3 copper coins, and a broken future. Snow covered the streets like a white grave as she walked slowly through the town that had never cared about her pain. The bakery was dark, the tavern closed, and the church doors locked against the cold. Even the house of the man who once promised to marry her had no light waiting for her. That moment taught her a painful truth. Promises could disappear faster than warmth on a winter night. With nowhere left to go, she walked toward the forest beyond the edge of town, the place people feared after sunset, because old stories whispered about shadows that lived among the trees. But fear meant little to someone who had already lost everything. The wind screamed through the branches as she pushed deeper into the forest, her breath turning into white clouds that vanished into the darkness. Her legs trembled from exhaustion, and the cold slowly crept into her bones until every step became a battle. Bent through the falling snow, she saw a figure standing alone near the trees, tall and unmoving, wrapped in a dark cloak. Relief flooded her tired mind. She thought it must be a traveler, or perhaps someone she knew who had been caught in the storm. Without thinking, she stumbled forward and threw her arms around the stranger from behind, pressing her freezing face against his back while trying to share what little warmth she had left. "You'll freeze out here," she whispered weakly, holding tighter as if she could save him from the storm. But the moment felt strange. The man beneath her arms was colder than the night itself, colder than ice, and his body did not move like a living person's should. Slowly the stranger turned within her embrace, and when the girl looked up, fear struck her heart like lightning. The face staring down at her looked almost unreal, pale as moonlight with eyes that shone like silver mirrors, reflecting the fire of distant stars. His presence felt ancient and powerful, the kind of presence that made the forest itself seem silent. The girl tried to step back, but strong hands gently caught her wrists before she could fall into the snow. The stranger studied her with quiet confusion, as if trying to understand something he had not felt for centuries. "You hugged me," he said softly, his voice deep and calm like distant thunder rolling across mountains. The girl's heart pounded wildly as realization dawned in her mind. Every story whispered in Thornwick suddenly became real in that moment. The ancient citadel above the mountains had never been empty. The Shadow King from the legends stood right in front of her. And for the first time in 500 years, the Vampire King felt the warmth of a human embrace. When the girl's strength finally gave out, the freezing storm swallowed her senses, and the world faded into darkness. She felt herself falling, but before the snow could claim her, strong arms caught her gently. The Vampire King looked down at the fragile human in his arms, confused by the strange warmth she had brought with her. For centuries, he had walked the world like a shadow, feared by humans and obeyed by vampires, yet no one had ever touched him with kindness. But this girl had embraced him without fear, believing he was just another freezing traveler in the storm. The thought lingered in his mind as he carried her through the forest and toward the towering black walls of his ancient castle. The gates opened silently as guards stepped aside, lowering their heads in respect while their king passed through with the unconscious human girl. Inside the castle, the halls were vast and silent, lit by blue flames that flickered along stone walls older than most kingdoms. The king placed the girl carefully on a bed near a massive fireplace where warm light slowly pushed away the cold trapped in her bones. Servants entered quietly to bring blankets and food, but none dared speak. They had never seen their ruler bring a human inside the citadel, and the sight alone filled the halls with whispers. Hours passed before the girl finally opened her eyes, blinking slowly as she tried to understand where she was. The room was enormous, filled with carved pillars and heavy curtains, and the fire beside her burned with steady warmth. Sitting across from her, near the flames, was the same man from the forest, his silver eyes reflecting the dancing light. The moment she recognized him, fear returned to her chest like ice spreading through water. The stories of Thornwick had always warned about the vampire king who ruled from the mountain above the forest. People said he was ruthless, immortal, and dangerous to any human who crossed his path. The girl tried to sit up quickly, but weakness forced her back against the pillows. The king watched her calmly before speaking in a quiet voice that carried surprising patience. He explained that the storm outside would have killed her if she had stayed in the forest, and that the castle was the only place where she could survive until the weather cleared. The girl listened carefully, unsure whether to believe him or the frightening stories she had grown up hearing. Her mind struggled to understand why the king had saved her life when it would have been easier to leave her in the snow. The king seemed to sense her confusion and leaned slightly closer, studying her face as if searching for answers hidden in her expression. He admitted that what she had done in the forest was something he had not experienced for hundreds of years. Humans usually ran away from him in terror, yet she had chosen to offer warmth instead of fear. The girl lowered her eyes nervously and explained that she had thought he was someone else, just a traveler freezing in the blizzard. Her voice was soft but honest, and the king could feel the truth in every word she spoke. For a moment, silence filled the room as both of them considered the strange situation they had found themselves in. Finally, the girl gathered the courage to ask the question that had been haunting her mind since she woke up. She asked why the king had not simply sent her away once the storm passed. The vampire king turned his gaze toward the fire, and his expression changed slightly, as if remembering something painful. He revealed that the castle had been empty of human voices for centuries, and that the small moment of warmth she had given him in the forest had awakened something he believed was long gone. But kindness in a vampire's world was never simple, and he warned her that the castle was not a safe place for someone like her. There were powerful beings within its walls who would not welcome a human guest. The girl felt a shiver run through her, realizing that although she had been rescued from the storm, she might now be standing in the middle of a much greater danger. As the fire crackled softly beside them, the vampire king made a quiet decision that would change both of their lives forever. He told her she could stay in the castle until the storm fully passed, and during that time no one would harm her under his protection. But neither of them realized that the moment she stepped inside the ancient citadel, she had also stepped into the center of a mystery older than the kingdom itself. The days that followed inside the dark castle felt strange and unreal to the poor girl. She had spent her whole life struggling to survive in a small town that barely noticed her existence. Yet now she walked through grand halls of black stone that were older than the oldest stories she had ever heard. Servants quietly brought her warm food and clean clothes, but their eyes always carried a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. No human had been allowed inside the citadel for centuries, and the presence of a poor girl from Thornwick had disturbed the silent balance of the vampire kingdom. The vampire king rarely spoke during those first days, yet he appeared whenever she wandered too far through the castle corridors, as if he had been watching over her from the shadows. He never acted cruelly, but there was always something distant in his silver eyes, something heavy and ancient that reminded her he was not like any man she had ever known. On the fourth evening, the king finally asked her to walk with him to a chamber deep inside the castle, where powerful elders of the vampire court were waiting. The girl felt nervous the moment she entered the circular hall, because the air there carried an invisible weight that made every heartbeat feel louder. 5 ancient vampires sat in tall stone seats, arranged like judges watching a trial. Their eyes studied the human girl with cold interest, and she quickly realized that her presence was not welcomed by everyone in the room. The elders spoke about old laws that protected the vampire kingdom from human interference, and they questioned the king about why he had brought a fragile human into their domain. The vampire king answered calmly that the girl had saved his life in the storm by offering warmth when she believed he was dying. The elders found this explanation strange and difficult to accept, because vampires were creatures of power, not beings who needed saving from humans. After a long discussion, they decided the girl must face a test to prove that her heart was truly pure, and that she had not entered the castle with hidden intentions. In the center of the chamber stood a black stone bowl filled with a mysterious liquid that looked like dark glass reflecting the dim torchlight. The elders explained that the bowl would reveal the truth about anyone who stood before it. If the person carried selfish desires, fear, or hidden greed, the liquid would turn black and destroy them instantly. But if the person's heart was filled with genuine kindness, the liquid would glow with golden light instead. The girl listened carefully, her hands trembling slightly, because she understood that refusing the test would mean leaving the castle immediately, which could also mean angering the king and the elders at the same time. The vampire king stepped forward and looked directly at her, his silver eyes holding quiet concern. He told her she did not have to prove anything if she did not wish to, but she surprised everyone by calmly walking toward the bowl without hesitation. The chamber became completely silent as she knelt before the strange liquid and closed her eyes. At first nothing happened, and the dark surface of the bowl remained perfectly still. Then slowly faint ripples began to move across the liquid, as if responding to the rhythm of her heartbeat. Cold whispers seemed to fill the air around her, repeating cruel memories from her life in Thornwick, reminding her of every moment when people had treated her like she was worthless. The whispers tried to create fear inside her mind, but instead of fighting them, she remembered the kindness her mother had once shown her when she was a child. She remembered the warmth of the small hug she had given a stranger in the snow without expecting anything in return. As those memories grew stronger, the dark liquid suddenly began to shine with a soft golden light that filled the entire chamber. The elders stared in astonishment, because the glow was brighter than anything they had seen in many generations. The vampire king stepped closer, unable to hide the quiet wonder in his expression. The poor girl from Thornwick had passed the ancient test not through strength or power, but through something far rarer in the vampire world. She had proven that her heart carried a purity capable of bringing light even into a castle built on centuries of darkness. After the golden light faded from the ancient bowl, the chamber remained silent for several long moments. The vampire elders watched the human girl with expressions that were no longer filled with simple suspicion, but with something far more complicated. None of them had expected such a result, especially from someone so young and ordinary. The glow she had produced in the test was not weak or uncertain. It had filled the entire chamber like sunrise after a long winter night. Finally, one of the elders spoke in a slow, thoughtful voice and declared that the girl had passed the trial. According to the old laws of the vampire court, Anyone who survived the bull's judgment, without darkness in their heart, could not be harmed within the castle. The decision meant the girl was now under the protection of ancient law, as well as the protection of the vampire king himself. The elders did not look pleased about this outcome, but the rules were older than any of them, and even they could not break them. When the meeting ended, the girl quietly followed the king back through the endless stone corridors of the citadel. For the first time since she had arrived, the tension in her chest began to fade slightly. She had proven that she meant no harm, and the king had kept his promise to protect her. Yet something about the night still felt unfinished, as if the castle itself was watching her every step. The vampire king stopped beside a large window that overlooked the dark mountains surrounding the citadel. The moonlight reflected softly across the snow below, creating a peaceful scene far removed from the danger inside the castle walls. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and the silence between them felt strangely comfortable rather than frightening. The girl finally gathered the courage to ask the king a question that had been on her mind since the test ended. She asked why the elders seemed so surprised by the golden light from the bowl. The king explained that the test had been used for hundreds of years to judge strangers, criminals, and even vampires who were suspected of betrayal. Many had stood before it, but very few had ever produced a glow that strong. According to old vampire legends, a heart capable of creating such light possessed a rare quality that could influence the balance between darkness and compassion. The girl listened quietly, unsure how someone as ordinary as herself could carry something so rare. The king then admitted something that surprised even him. Since the moment she had hugged him in the forest, he had felt a strange change inside himself, something warm that had not existed in his world for centuries. Vampires did not easily trust emotions because immortality often turned feelings into painful memories. Yet her presence had begun to awaken parts of him he believed had disappeared long ago. The girl lowered her eyes shyly, unsure how to respond to words coming from someone so powerful. She reminded him that she had only helped because she believed a stranger was freezing to death, nothing more. The king allowed himself a faint smile and replied that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness were the most powerful. That simple hug had broken through centuries of cold isolation that even vampire power could not overcome. Over the next several days, the strange bond between them continued to grow quietly. The girl spent her time exploring safe parts of the castle, discovering libraries filled with ancient knowledge and gardens hidden behind tall stone walls where winter flowers somehow survived. The king often joined her there, sometimes speaking about old history, and sometimes simply walking beside her in comfortable silence. The guards who served the king began to notice a difference in their ruler as well. He appeared calmer, less distant, and occasionally even thoughtful in ways they had never seen before. Yet not everyone inside the castle welcomed this change. Deep within the citadel, whispers began spreading among certain powerful vampires who believed a human had no place influencing their immortal king. They feared that kindness might weaken the ruler who had protected their kingdom for centuries. Neither the girl nor the king realized that these quiet whispers were slowly growing into a dangerous plan. As another cold night settled over the mountain citadel, the poor girl from Thornwick unknowingly stood at the center of a conflict that could change the future of the vampire kingdom forever. As the days passed inside the ancient citadel, the strange calm that had surrounded the girl and the vampire king slowly began to fade. The golden light she had produced during the trial had spread through the castle like a legend reborn, and not every vampire welcomed such a miracle. In hidden halls and shadowed balconies, quiet voices began questioning the king's decision to keep a human within the walls of their sacred fortress. Many feared that her presence might weaken the king or disrupt the balance that had protected their world for centuries. The girl noticed the tension growing around her, even though no one spoke directly to her about it. Guards who once ignored her now watched carefully whenever she walked through the corridors, and servants whispered among themselves when they thought she could not hear them. Yet the vampire king remained calm and continued to treat her with quiet respect, as if none of the rumors mattered. One evening he invited her to walk with him along the high balcony that overlooked the snow-covered valley beneath the mountain. The wind was cold but peaceful, and the distant lights of Thornwick flickered far below like tiny stars. The girl looked down at the town where she had spent her entire life struggling to survive. From the height of the castle, the place looked small and quiet, almost harmless. Yet she knew too well how cruel it could be to someone with nothing. The king noticed the sadness in her eyes and gently asked what she was thinking about. She told him that despite everything that had happened to her in Thornwick, part of her still wished life there had been kinder. She had never expected her path to lead to a castle filled with vampires and ancient mysteries. The king listened silently before speaking in a thoughtful voice. He explained that even immortality could not protect someone from loneliness or regret. For 500 years he had ruled the vampire kingdom with strength and discipline, but the long centuries had slowly turned his world into a place without warmth. When the girl had hugged him in the forest, believing he was just another traveler freezing in the snow, it had awakened a feeling he thought had vanished forever. That simple act had reminded him what kindness felt like. The girl felt her heart race slightly when she heard his words, because she realized their connection had grown deeper than either of them expected. However, the peaceful moment did not last long. Later that night, one of the castle guards arrived with urgent news that forced the king to return to the council chamber immediately. When the girl followed him there, she discovered the elders gathered in serious discussion. They had received troubling information from the lands beyond the mountains. Certain vampire factions who disagreed with the king's leadership had learned about the human girl and believed her presence proved the king had become too sympathetic toward humans. Those rivals were now preparing to challenge the authority of the citadel itself. The news filled the chamber with tension because any challenge to the king could easily turn into a dangerous conflict between vampire clans. The elders looked toward the girl again, realizing she had unintentionally become the symbol of a much larger struggle. If enemies believed she had weakened the king, they might try to remove both of them to claim power for themselves. The girl felt a heavy weight settle on her heart as she understood the consequences of her presence. She had come to the castle by accident, yet now the future of the vampire kingdom might depend on the decisions she and the king made next. When the meeting ended, she quietly asked the king if leaving the castle would solve the problem. The king paused before answering, because the truth was not simple. If she left now, his rivals would still see her existence as proof that he had allowed human influence inside the citadel. But if she stayed, the growing tension might eventually lead to open confrontation. For the first time since they had met, both of them realized they were standing at a crossroads where every choice carried risk. The poor girl who once struggled to survive in Thornwick now faced a decision that could shape the destiny of creatures far older and more powerful than herself. The night after the council meeting felt heavier than any storm the girl had faced before. The castle corridors were quiet, yet the silence carried a strange tension, as if the ancient walls themselves understood that something important was about to happen. The vampire king stood alone in the great hall, staring at the tall windows where moonlight poured across the black marble floor. For 500 years he had ruled with strength, discipline, and distance from all human emotions, believing that immortality required a heart made of stone. Yet everything had begun to change the moment a freezing girl had wrapped her arms around him in the forest and offered warmth, without knowing who he truly was. The girl slowly approached him across the silent hall, her footsteps echoing softly. She had spent hours thinking about the problem facing the kingdom and had finally reached a decision. When the king turned to face her, she spoke calmly even though her heart beat quickly in her chest. She told him she planned to leave the castle at sunrise and return to Thornwick. If she disappeared from the citadel, the rival vampire clans would lose their reason to challenge his authority. The king listened carefully, but his expression immediately hardened with quiet determination. He told her that allowing fear to drive her away would only prove the rivals were correct about him being weak. More importantly, he reminded her that she had already shown more courage than many powerful vampires who lived inside the castle. The girl tried to explain that she did not want to be the reason for conflict between immortal beings whose world she barely understood. The king stepped closer and looked directly into her eyes with a seriousness she had never seen before. He admitted that the true danger was not her presence, but the fear others felt toward kindness and change. For centuries, the vampire kingdom had survived by trusting only strength and tradition. Yet that path had slowly drained the life and hope from everyone inside the citadel. The king confessed that her kindness had reminded him that leadership was not only about power, but also about compassion. In that moment, the girl realized that the hug she had given a stranger in the snow had awakened something far greater than she had imagined. The king then revealed his own decision. Instead of hiding from his rivals or forcing the girl to leave, he would face the challenge directly and declare before the entire vampire court that the human girl was under his permanent protection. If any vampire believed kindness made their king weak, they would have to challenge him openly. The girl felt a mixture of fear and admiration as she understood the risk he was willing to take. Before she could respond, the castle bells suddenly rang through the night, announcing the arrival of messengers from the rival clans. The moment everyone had feared had finally come. Guards gathered in the great hall, while elders took their places beside the throne. The girl stood quietly near the king as the heavy doors opened and several powerful vampires entered the chamber. They had expected to see hesitation or weakness in the ruler of the citadel, but instead they found a king standing with calm confidence beside the human who had changed his world. The king addressed the challengers with a voice that filled the hall like thunder rolling across mountains. He declared that the girl had proven her pure heart before the ancient laws of the vampire court, and that her kindness had reminded him what true strength meant. He warned that any attack against her would be treated as an attack against the throne itself. The challengers studied the king carefully, sensing that his resolve was stronger than ever before. After a long silence, they finally stepped back, realizing the ruler before them had not been weakened by compassion, but strengthened by it. Slowly, the tension in the hall began to fade as the rivals withdrew their challenge. When the last of them left the chamber, the girl looked up at the king with quiet relief. The danger had passed, yet something far more meaningful had happened. The coldest king in the shadows had rediscovered his heart, and it had begun with the warmth of a poor girl who simply refused to let a stranger freeze in the snow.